So I would argue, James, that in a dog eat dog world, in a corporate world, in a fast paced world, is this realistic? Because I'm constantly looking at who's behind my shoulder. I'm constantly comparing myself. I'm constantly comparing who I graduated with and where they are in life. Okay. And I'm constantly in this world of saying, hey, what does success mean? And therefore, the benchmark of success of how other people see you also means that, hey, I've not done as well as others would have thought. So, therefore, is this really practical? Or if I have to make it practical, how do I, resolve it in my own head?
Yes. And, I used to work with a global team. I had lawyers working with me in the US, in Europe, in India, in China, and other countries. And what I often admired about my colleagues in India, for example, and in China, and I used them as a lesson for my Western colleagues, was to say, look, these people do not take their performance and their progress for granted. They work super hard to make progress. We should not be complacent in Europe and in the United States and assume that our jobs are secure. If there's somebody who's willing to work twice as hard as us for half the pay, well, that's a real competitive threat. So you are correct to identify the environments in which we work as a very relevant factor. And that's going to differ depending upon how far you are in your career, what your training is, and what company you're in and who your competitors are at that moment. I would say it's right that you raise it, a default standard for me in a person seeking to achieve important goals and success in their life, a default standard is that you always perform your best. Not because anyone else is expecting you to do so, but because you hold yourself to a high standard. As soon as you are giving less than your best, and only you will know if you could do more, then you are at risk of someone outcompeting you. That does not mean, by the way, that you work 24 hours a day. I worked extremely hard at many points in my career. I started out working 100-hour weeks, and then I felt like it was a break to work 80-hour weeks and 60-hour weeks. There's no question that being willing to work harder is a potential competitive advantage, but work alone is not sufficient, and maybe we'll talk about that more later. So I want to address head on your basic question. Is it really pragmatic to focus on person? I think it is, for the reason I mentioned before, which is that a person whose life is in balance, or at least who's aware of other factors in their life, I think performs better at work. They're happier, they're not resentful, they give themselves with intensity to their job when they're there, and then they give themselves with intensity to their private life when they're not at work. And maybe the other thing I would say is your long-term happiness is not worth sacrificing for your short-term career success. Because again, you might succeed and outcompete somebody, but what does it get you if you're then miserable, unhealthy, and have a heart attack by the time you're 40? It simply is an inappropriate bargain and unfair trade-off. So if you find yourself in an environment where you feel like you must sacrifice your personal life for your career success, this is easy to say, and I can't say that it's easy to do. You must consider changing your environment. Either you change your mindset, you change where you work. There are plenty of companies that will allow you to be a whole person and have a life outside of your work. That's what you need to strive for, where you do not have to sacrifice your personal life. So it can be done, but it is definitely a dynamic worth paying attention to. What is the competitive environment that you find yourself in?